been really nice and fun. Thank you for that. And well, thank you, Philip, for the invitation, and Scott for your introduction, for your kind invitation, and for your keen interest in learning more about the bilateral relationship between Mexico and the United States. It's always a pleasure to get to know new friends outside the capital beltway and to validate the importance that the bilateral relation has in the agendas of organizations such as ICA. Let me start by saying that last year, 2022, on December the 12th, Mexico and the United States celebrated 200 years of the establishment of diplomatic relations. Oh. Yeah. So besides our 200 years of common history, Mexico and the United States share 2,000 miles of border, as you well know. And this border it's amazing because it's not just a physical space or an economic space or a commercial space. It is a cultural and social space where people come and go all the time. People are family. People are used to cross to buy some groceries or to go to the dentist or to go to school. They speak one language, which is Spanglish. It's a language per se. So it's, if you go to the border, I don't know, you have gone to the border, sometimes you have you visited the border, but it's amazing to just to walk and to cross and to feel the border. And you get a feeling of how important is this relationship. I would say that this relationship is unique. It's really very unique. And it's unique not because of the hard data, that I will go through that, but precisely because of this border, because we are family at the end of the day. We were distant neighbors, as an author once wrote a book. We were distant neighbors and we have become partners, I hope allies, better allies, and we are family. What is a characteristic of this relationship? This relationship is intermestic. That means that domestic issues and international issues are closely related in both countries. That's interesting. And this relationship impacts the daily life of millions of Mexicans and Americans. Our agenda is enormous, it's immense. The traditional topics are migration. You hear a lot about migration, trade, security issues, but we also deal with environment, with water, with fishing, with tourism, with culture, with heritage, with many, many things. And this is not a relationship that federal governments do all the time. I mean, federal governments, yes, we do and work on the relationship, but states work together. We work with municipalities, other actors like universities, academia, private sector, scientists, artists, sports, women and men. I mean, it's really huge. The multiple stakeholders, the multiple actors that are involved in this very, very rich relationship and unique relationship. What has happened in the history of our bilateral relations? The US was one of the first countries in recognizing our independence. We got our independence in 1821, and the US recognized us as an independent country in 1822. That was when we established formal diplomatic relations. 20 years later, between 1846 and 1848, we went to war, Mexico and the US, and that was one of the darkest moments in our history because it implied the loss of more than half of our territory to the US. That's also well known, but it was a very dark episode in our history. The second US invasion, it was in 1914. This invasion revealed the high tensions that characterized the bilateral relationship as the result of the U.S. meddling in Mexico's internal affairs. That's something that hurts a lot in Mexico, and the president also he speaks about interventionism and all that, and self-determination, because our history is, our principles of foreign policy are based in our history, and self-determination, non-intervention are the result of a whole history, not just in the US, but with other countries as well. Another important episode is World War II. Mexico and the US were allies in World War II. A very important date as well, as part of the history, is 1942, when both countries agreed on the only framework of temporary labor mobility, the Programa Bracero. I don't know if you remember or rings the bell, but it was a very important program and the only one that both countries have agreed upon. Now we're trying to find a good moment to do something similar, but it has been much more difficult. During the following decades, the bilateral relation was almost inert. It was until the 80s and 90s that the relationship reached a turning point due to our different views on foreign policy, on security, and national interests, with respect particularly to Central America and Cuba. I won't go to this because we have a lot of topics to talk about, but if you're interested in learning more about these episodes in our bilateral relationship, in our history, I will be very happy to answer those questions. Another external fact that impacted on our bilateral relationship was the end of the Cold War. The ideological opposition and the clash of worldwide were left behind, and Mexico radically transformed the way to engage in diplomacy. What happened with this relationship? Both countries realized the importance of institutionalizing the relationship. That is why both countries, both governments decided to create mechanisms to institutionalize the relationship. So they created the National Commission, which was one of the first mechanisms that was created for political dialogue. All the agenda was part of this commission, so everything has to go through the commission. Then, of course, we signed NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, in 1994. We signed it in 1991. It entered into force in 1994, and then it was modernized recently in 2018. We signed the USMCA, which is the modern version of NAFTA, and it's important because we introduced some issues like e-commerce, labor provisions, mechanisms for controversies, and the so-called sunset clause. What is this? This is in 2026. The three governments are supposed to decide if we continue with this treaty or it's the end of the treaty. So it's a very important year in 2026. So other mechanisms that were created were the Merida Initiative. I don't know if you heard about it, but it has to do with security issues. It was really a very strong collaboration in terms of security. The US had a big office for Merida Initiative in Mexico, so it was a very strong relationship. And this changed, and this Merida Initiative was transformed into the so-called binational understanding, which is focusing more on health issues on the people. People are in the center of the attention in terms of security. The other mechanisms that were created as well is the high-level economic dialogue, focusing pretty much in supply chains, in semiconductors, in competitiveness, in migration, in addressing the structural causes of migration. This is very important because if we don't pay attention to why people are moving and why people are migrating, you cannot solve this issue. You cannot address this issue properly. So Mexico started talking about addressing these causes. VP Harris started talking about this, and actually she went to Guatemala at the beginning of the government and President Biden's government, and there's coincidence in dealing with structural causes and with promoting development. We talked about the importance of development, so it's something that also is important to address. The other mechanism that was created is the 21st Century Border Plan, which is very functional. Why? Because it's not politicized at all, because it's very straightforward. It's all about infrastructure, it's all about flow of goods and of people, but paying attention to a balance, to promote a facilitation of trade, but at the same time security. But yeah, and this mechanism works out very, very well at the border. So let me, well, the other mechanism that was created in 2005, but this is trilateral, and was, there was some years when it disappeared, it didn't continue working, it's North American Leaders Summit. We will host the North American Leaders Summit next week, and President Biden is traveling to Mexico on the 9th and the 10th of January. So next week, we will have President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau traveling to Mexico, the Three Amigos, it's called the Three Amigos. They will get together and they will discuss about all these issues. Also, if you want to know more about this, please, I will go through that as well. Allow me to get into substance and show you some data that are very relevant that show the dynamism of this relationship. In 2021, our trade totaled $661 billion. That means that we trade every single minute $1.3 million per minute and $1.8 billion on any given day. This shows the dynamics of this relationship. This amount represents an increase of 23% when compared to that of 2020. The US exports more to Mexico than to the European Union, Latin America, the African Union, Australia, and Oceania. How do you pronounce Oceania? Oceania? Yes. Oceania. Yeah, thank you. Another relevant data, Mexico is the first, second, or third main market for 34 states out of the 50 states of the Union. It is also important to underline that 5 million jobs in the US depend directly on the trade with Mexico. We produce together, that's another characteristic of this relationship. We produce together. That means that one product goes back and forth across our border 8 times before it is finalized. And 40% of the final value of a made in Mexico product comes from the US. This is something that it's not well known, but it's true. 40% of content is American content of the product. What about investments? The US has accumulated more than $292 billion of investment in Mexico, becoming our main investor. But not only the US invests in Mexico, also Mexican companies are investing in the US. Our companies have accumulated over $42 billion of investments in the US and created more than 80,000 jobs in the food, auto parts, communications, and service sectors of the US economy. Another sector is tourism. We were talking about tourism. In the table, I think everybody has travel to Mexico, and I'm very happy to hear that. So I bet you have gone to Mexico at least once, I think, I hope. But so between January and October of 2022, Mexico received 10.6 million of US tourists. Obviously, it's our main tourist market. And the second is Canada. And guess how many visitors do we have? Just a number.
50 million.
1.2 million from Canada, 10.6 million from the US. Our second market is Canada. So look at this difference, it's enormous, no? So this is like the interesting thing about this very unique relationship. Let's talk a little bit about migration. Migration, we understand migration as a global phenomenon to be managed, not a problem that has to be solved. This is very important because if you think in those terms, you go to look for other options, more flexible options. Now we are talking about regional responsibility. Migration is not something that belongs to Mexico, the US. The equation has changed a lot. Before, like 5 years ago, 10 years, no, like 5 years ago, because it has changed enormously. The equation was Mexico, Central America, and the US. Mexicans came to the US and have been coming to the US for many, many years. The migration was circular before, when the Bracero program was in place. They didn't want to stay here. They wanted to look for better conditions of life, to make a better salary. The gap is 10 times more money they make here than in Mexico. I mean, it's a pole of attraction par excellence, the US, in terms of migration. So the circularity was stopped because of the danger to cross again. So people used to come and go, and after the crop ended, they went back to Mexico. They started to find more difficult to go back to the US. So they started staying here. So overstays have increased a lot. Central Americans as well, they have been trying to cross for many years as well because they are looking for better conditions of life. The same reasons why Mexicans are looking for jobs here. But the interesting thing is that the rate of Mexicans decreased. In 2000 to 2010, it was 0 or negative. It started to grow again because of the pandemics. Central Americans, the numbers increased a lot because of violence, because of nature, because of climate change. And Mexico has a particularity. We are a country of origin, transit, destination, and return of migrants. We have the 4 characteristics. So now people are staying in Mexico. You can't imagine, if you go to our border in Tijuana, there are Haitians, Venezuelans, Colombians, people from Uzbekistan, from Tajikistan, from Kyrgyzstan, from Russia, from Cuba, Venezuela. Everybody is there trying to come to the US. And you know, you see and you read all the time in the papers. The thing is that, I would say for the first time, we are taking a regional perspective of the phenomenon. And that means that every single country has to take responsibility. The responsibility they can take. And I'm sure that, for instance, Panama, they are crossing the Darien, which is very, very dangerous. People are crossing from Panama, but they are passing Costa Rica, just let them pass, and then they go to Mexico, and then they reach the border, and they stay there with all the pressure that it means for the municipalities. So it's huge. This phenomenon is huge. And that was why in the Summit of the Americas, this was discussed. And they signed the Declaration of Los Angeles for Migration and Protection. This is the first time that we talk about protection, because minors are crossing. Minors are not like 5 years old or 6, but adolescents. Children and adolescents are crossing alone by themselves. So we need to protect them. So we are negotiating agreements to protect these children and these people and these families that are crossing or trying to cross to the United States. The other thing we are doing with the United States is there was a program, it's called United with Ukraine. I don't remember if it's Uniting for Ukraine, something like that, but it was very interesting because Ukrainians were coming to Mexico, again to the border, to the land border, and then crossing, and they were accepted in the US because of the situation. But the thing is that it was adding pressure to that municipality, to Tijuana in particular. And there were also Africans, lots of Africans, many Africans there from the Congo, from all these very poor countries as well. So it was really incredible. This is something that never has happened before. And this was increased, the numbers were increased since President Biden took office because they thought, okay, there's no more a government with President Trump, so now we might go and try to reunite with our families or to cross to find a job because the US needs workers. That's also a reality. But the ones who took advantage of this situation, guess who were there? The smugglers. Those criminals that are charging like $20,000 for 3 attempts to cross. It's a big business. And they are offering like tours, like packages from Brazil to Mexico. So they fly or they walk or they take a bus. That all depends. The price is according to the means of transportation you decide that you can pay. It's terrible. It's terrible, but this is happening. The Russians, for instance, they fly to Cancun. After 3 days, they flee, they disappear, and they are at the border, and they cross the border. I mean, these are the things that we are watching there. So Mexico and the United States are working very closely, collaborating a lot. Mexico is doing a lot to stop that migration, to offer Central Americans jobs in Mexico, but properly, with authorization, with health services, with social security. We are providing all that, because if not, I mean, we are requesting that in the US, not for our workers. Okay, accept them, accept undocumented people that are 5.4 undocumented Mexican migrants are living here. So we are requesting for them social security, health services, etc. We are offering, we have to do the same down there in our southern border. So this is like a kind of a nutshell. It's very complex, very complicated, but this is something that is happening in Mexico. I don't have the last number of migrants, but it's really increasing. It's very, very high, the number of migrants. And Mexicans who were not crossing now are crossing again because of the pandemics. So, just to talk about a little bit about Hispanic, we can go back to migration if you want me to say something else. Hispanics are the largest ethnic minority in the US. They represent 18.7% of the total US population, and 63% of them are from Mexican origin. 34.7 million people of Mexican origin live in the United States. That is 11.3% of the total US population. 12.3 million were born in Mexico. 25.1 million are second and third generation Mexicans. People of Mexican origin that live in the US contribute to the growth and prosperity of the US society as a whole. Allow me to put this statement into perspective. 7 out of 10 workers in the agricultural sector are from Mexican origin. 1 million essential workers are undocumented Mexican migrants whose contribution was made clear during the pandemic. There were health workers and undocumented workers, but they were really doing something in regard to the pandemic. Now, I'm going to move to talk a little bit about drugs and weapons. It's so huge, the agenda, that I want to give you some pieces of information, and then we can, talk more about the topic you are interested in. To better understand why the government of Mexico initiated a strategic lawsuit against producers, distributors, and sellers of firearms, I'll give you some data. Mexico decided to sue 8 companies in Massachusetts, but the companies, not the US government, no, the sue is against the companies, and the reason is negligence. They are selling the weapons to anyone. But with those weapons, the criminals are killing people in Mexico. So just to give you an idea, 500,000 firearms are trafficked annually from the US to Mexico. The annual value of said arms equals $170 million. 70% of the firearms that are confiscated in Mexico come from the US and 30% from Europe. 41% of the arms that are confiscated in Mexico come from Texas, 19% from California, and 15% from Arizona. Mexico is the 3rd country with the highest death rate by firearms in the world. And you read about cartels and you read about all these criminals. It's really incredible. Mexico has taken a multifaceted strategy to help stem the flood of guns from the US, particularly assault weapons, that empower cartels. They are very rich and very powerful cartels, very, very powerful. They have both cash and they have weapons. And they have much more sophisticated weapons than the army does. So it's really something very, very dangerous and very concerning. Today, 2 lawsuits have been filed. The one that I mentioned, that is filed in the US Federal District Court of Boston, and the other against gun shops filed in the US Federal District Court of Tucson, Arizona. The first one we lost. Well, we will appeal. We are in the process. The government of Mexico is in the process of appealing. But it has reached like an interesting empathy. It has found empathy in the government of President Biden, this issue about guns. And so we are working together in this regard. But linked to the arms are drugs, and you are very worried, the US is very worried about fentanyl. You know about fentanyl. There's more than 100,000 deaths last year, I think, because of fentanyl. It's terrible. Fentanyl is coming from China to Mexico. They have clandestine labs. They make tablets and then bring them to the US. We are collaborating a lot, Mexico and the US, to stop this traffic of fentanyl and also weapons on the other side. But if we work together, we do much better, and that is very evident. So we are really looking toward that. We have that goal to continue working together. Just a brief comment about the border. Well, I told you about the space that is the border, but let me tell you that 50 million people live in the border. The 10 border states represent the fourth economy in the world. It has 56 border ports that daily witness the crossing of 1 million people, 447,000 vehicles, 30,000 cargo trucks, and 87% of our trade. So this is our border. And just a final comment on the North American Leaders Summit that I mentioned before, and President Biden is attending this summit in Mexico. This is it's a very important dialogue between the three countries. North America is the most competitive region in the world, but we are facing challenges because of China, because of Asia. They produce semiconductors, they manufacture semiconductors. We are not producing semiconductors. We don't have semiconductors. Like, this is why we couldn't export refrigerators, we couldn't export screens, because we don't have semiconductors. So now, with CHIPS Act and with the Inflation Reduction Act, that production is, or those companies can get some resources, some money to fabricate our own resources. We need to fabricate our own semiconductors to depend less and less from Asia. So this is something that is being addressed in these kind of mechanisms, like now. The value chains, the supply chains are a main issue here. Also, competitiveness, also migration and development. Canada is really involved in migration issues for the first time. It's very important to have Canada on board. Health issues, regional security, diversity, equality, and inclusion. Those are the topics that will be discussed at the trilateral level. But President Biden and President López Obrador will have a bilateral meeting as well. I have to finish. So, the rest I will leave it for the questions. Thank you very much.